Oh, the near-death experience, that happened when I was 36, and, that was a long time ago now. That would be, my goodness, about 24 year 24 years ago? Yeah, so, about 24 years ago, I had my near-death experience, and, I had been struggling with, apathy heart failure, which I had contracted as peripartum cardiomyopathy, which is a kind of a rare complication of pregnancy and childbirth. And it's very serious. And I had been typed out for a heart transplant and all kinds of things like that. And um, what had occurred was I was, I had been doing pretty well on medications for a while. And in the previous in the previous month or so, my doctors had been doing tests and my heart had been getting worse. And they had talked about having me get a cardiac catheterization done. And they were going to send me up to Denver. They were going to have me go up there with the possible situation of waiting for a transplant. And because it was doing quite a bit worse at the time. And so we were getting ready to do this cardiac catheterization. My echocardiograms had been coming back and they were worse, significantly worse enough for them to consider doing this. And the night before the procedure, something went wrong. You know, I don't really know because I was not in the hospital. I was at home in bed and I died. It was probably because of the condition I had, it was probably like an arrhythmia of some kind. Arrhythmias are very common with that type of condition, cardiomyopathy and heart failure. So I probably went into some kind of arrhythmia. And so I left my body. so, and so I started shooting towards space. And there was this dark black tunnel with a light at the end up ahead of me. But I was shooting through what I call like the galactic heavens. It was just beautiful outer space, really, towards it. And when I reached it, I was, floating in the heavens above where I could see the earth below. And it was beautiful. And I could see this tunnel right here. And um, And ironically, my cute little dog that I had had as a child for 25 years, who had passed away, was sitting there in the light waiting for me. And it was really, it's hard to explain because it sounds really, kind of dorky. I was so moved by that my little dog was there. Uh, and so I had to figure out what I was going to do. So I started shooting down this tunnel. And I knew that because I've had these out of body experiences and I'd had a near death experience prior, about 20 years prior. Maybe it was more like 10, actually, now that I think about it. Yeah, it was more like 10. When I'd had an ectopic pregnancy and that had occurred during surgery. Um, and so I've had these experiences before. So I knew that when I got to the edge of the tunnel, there was this ethereal barrier. And I knew that if I went beyond it, I would not be able to come back. I just kind of inherently, instinctively knew this. And then, so I'm looking at it and I'm like, what should I do? I really want to go, but I know that if I do that, I can't come back. And And so I'm just kind of like there in the spirit, experiencing this, not sure what to do. And this is when the Lord Jesus Christ appears, and he appears in the beautiful robes of the Sacred Heart, the red, the white, and the gold robes that he appears in when he manifests as the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And he was just stunning. across the night sky. And he said, I'm going to take you on a little journey and I'm going to basically he's saying that he's going to bend the rules, you know? And so he says, I'm going to show you some things and I'm going to let you go beyond that veil and see some things. I'm not, but the rule is not going to hold. I'm taking you and, you're still going to have the option to go back. So he takes my hand and, we're speeding across, speed of light through that tunnel, through the ethereal veil. And then we're crashing through these realms and worlds in the cosmic, spheres. And I'm seeing all these different places really, really fast. They're all really, really beautiful. And all this information is, of course, entered into me, downloaded into me as I go through them. And I'm experiencing all of this wonder and enlightenment. The mysteries of heaven are, just being opened up to me while I'm there. And I understand everything. Everything makes sense. And then, so we go through this beautiful journey and he brings me back again to the entrance of the tunnel. And at the entrance of the tunnel, he shows me this measure, and this measure is like a measuring stick, except that it goes up and down, and it's a measure of our selfishness to selflessness as human beings. And he tells me your purpose on earth, as all souls, it was not just me, is to go from selfishness to selflessness. And I want you to look at this measure. And so he's showing me the measure and he shows me the measure, how it relates to certain people that are very close to me in life. And then he shows me the measure as to how it relates to my own soul and some of the things I've gone through. And he's saying, I'm at a level where I'm doing good. I've made progress. And he's saying, you have achieved the things you have to achieve. And if you want to, you can cross over and you have, you've completed these tasks, but you don't have to. It's going to be, your choice. And he shows me the world. And I'm looking down back at the world, which is, from the heavens and the big blue and white, beautiful ball in the sky. But it's not quite so beautiful in this moment because I hear the people screaming and yelling and, not getting along with one another. And the Lord says to me, he says, you won't be able to change it. It will be like that when you go back. You can't fix it. And he kind of conveys to me, um, downloads within me, this is the nature of humanity. This is the nature of sin, of karma, and it's going to continue to be that way. So if I had any delusions that I was going to go back and, change that dynamic, I was incorrect. But he was, saying, yet you still have this choice. And and then he comes and he's standing right in front of me. And again, you just have to kind of picture in your mind how amazingly, stunningly beautiful he is. The red, the white, and the gold, and the sparkle in his eyes, and everything about him shimmers in a celestial, cosmic way that, resonates who he is in his divinity. It's just, it's just you cannot even speak. You're just blown away by it. And so he says to me, so basically, what do you want to do? And I look at him and I say, well, if it's still a choice, I have these three little kids and I have to go back. And he says, okay, well, then I want you to go back and I want you to pray for a heart transplant. And I paused and I thought about it a moment and I said, Lord, I can't do that. And he said nothing. He just looked at me and waited. And then I looked at him and he said, but I will go back and I will pray that you will spare the perfectly healthy person who would have to die to give me a heart, will be spared, and I will take my chances with the one I've got. And then he pauses for a moment and he's looking around and he just thinks and he says, looks me deeply into the eyes and he says, I grant that. And then he takes my hands and we're shooting through space, but this time we're going towards the earth. And we head towards the earth, and there is a way station somewhere between where we were and earth where we stop. And in this way station, we stop at, um, it's very much like a coffee shop slash bookstore. And we stop there. He's sitting at a table with me. There's these books shelves all around us. And in this corner, there's all these books over here. And he directs my attention over there. And he says to me, I'm going to make good use of you um, while you are on earth. And he directs me and points that I should go look. I should look at these books. And I'm looking in that direction and I don't immediately realize is it, but in a minute I do that they have my name on them. And there's a whole lot of them. There's a lot of them. And I'm like, at this point in 2003, I had written 2 books. Now I've written 144. And so and so at the time, I'm looking at it and I'm like, are you saying what are you saying, Lord? And you will write these. You will write these. And I'm looking at him really closely because I'm feeling really overwhelmed because I'm like, what? I'm feeling such a responsibility all of a sudden. And I'm trying to look at them so I can remember what I see, like, okay, what kind of books does he want me to write? What is he talking about? You know what I mean? And I see various series of books. I see different kinds and different subject matters. And I take in what I can, but obviously I can't remember it all. And and then he takes my hand and we start shooting again towards Earth, wake up in my bed, and we head out, go to the hospital where they're going to have a chopper on standby to fly me to Denver. And I'm going to have this procedure. And they're planning to, fly me up there and then they'll have me wait for this heart transplant. So I go in to the hospital and they do this procedure and I wake up and I'm still in the hospital in my hometown and I'm like, hmm. And so I asked the doctor, so what's going on? And he said, well, we can't really explain it. Doesn't really make a lot of sense, but your heart's doing significantly better. And so we don't need to fly you up there. We still have to keep you on the medications. You're not healed. Anyway, I go home and, I have heart failure for another, I think it was another 12 years. And then I had a spontaneous, complete healing of it, which is unheard of with cardiomyopathy and heart failure. It doesn't do that. And I did forget one thing that the Lord said to me right before we left that way station. He said, I'm not going to heal you, but I'm going to help you. And then we headed back and he whooshes us through space and I wake up and then this all happens. And so I was very blessed. And then 13 years later, I had a complete healing of my heart, of a completely non a condition that doesn't do that. Oh,
Um,
thank you. I did know about NDEs before this happened. In fact, I'd had many out of body experiences and I'd had an NDE, not as extensive as this one, about probably 9 years before. I'd had an ectopic pregnancy that had ruptured, and I had had a very short experience while I had bled out during surgery. And so I'd had one before, but I was also aware of the experiences and had actually uh, appeared on the Joan Rivers show with Dr. Raymond Moody, Daniel Brinkley, George Anderson, George Ritchie, some of the great pioneers in near death studies in 1992, with some of my very first books, the first and second books that I had written. And so I was familiar with these things, and had been writing about them. Gosh, that's a great question. Uh, um, I don't think I realized how extraordinary it was until it was this medical doctor who was Catholic, who actually looked over my records at the direction of because he wanted her to look at them because of the situation. And she was so blown away by what had happened. And when she had explained to me how truly miraculous it was, I think that's when it really struck me. And then there were a couple of instances later when my own doctors, like at the Mayo Clinic, I had two different doctors on two separate occasions who said to me, I don't know if you realize just how unusual this is. This doesn't happen. And they said, I just want you to be aware that something was, you were given a nice little favor there, and this is just something very unusual. And I wanted you to know that. And it was like, "Oh, wow, really?" Because you do have a tendency to think, "Okay, well, maybe I just got." Of course, you always give all the glory to God and all the credit to God, but at the same time, you don't always realize that there really is, that level of miraculous, um, intention behind it that occurred sometimes. And so those were probably the moments where it really did hit me. I mean, the most powerful things I experienced in that was the deep, profound love for Christ. And I think this is what a lot of near death experiencers are trying to put into words is, how do you put that into words? Literally, God incarnate appears to you, and God is the embodiment of love itself. And all of a sudden, love is all around you, love is encompassing you. And all of a sudden, you understand what love actually is. You are in it, and now it's something that you are bathing in, you are absorbed in, and you are so overwhelmed with that understanding of how loved you are despite your humanness, all of our things, Um, and it's overwhelming, too. I think the other thing that really stuck with me. I even wrote a book about it, called From Selfishness to Selflessness, was that message of, simplifying what our earthly journey is about, which is um, this purification of our souls to go from this selfish nature that we all naturally have to becoming much more aware of the need to be more selfless and aware of the other, and how that is actually what we're here to do. That struck me in such a profound way. I think about it regularly, even now, as, one of the things I contemplate when I'm just praying or meditating, or when I'm having a tough time with things. I'll go back to this, this moment, and think about the things that were brought to me in that time. I didn't at that time. And you know what's interesting, because I didn't have it during the near death experience, but I did have a life review later that happened, I think, like within the next few weeks. And it was really, really intense. It was so intense. I literally remember just being in tears for like 2 or 3 weeks, and coming out of it with this deep awareness of, it's really hard to encapsulate the depth of this emotion, but you go in to all the things that you have yourself done, and you come out of it with this sense of the ridiculousness of ever having thought that anybody owed you an apology or anything, because you realize how much you need to be forgiven for yourself, and you realize how much mercy and grace that you need as a soul, and you realize all these things that you've held on to, with anybody or anything, how petty they are and how stupid they are. And you want to make everything right after you experience it. You go so deeply into it. You feel all of it. You feel it yourself. You feel it in terms of how everyone else felt it. And I think one of the hardest parts of it for me was that you try as best as you can to make things right with the things that have been, brought up to you, that you become aware of. But, you can't always fix it. And that's the hard part, is when you have to accept that you can only do what you can do, and you can put out that intention of atonement and love and resolution, but that doesn't always happen. In my case, because it wasn't like something had, catastrophically happened to me in this instance, it wasn't really dramatic. When I had the previous one, it was more dramatic, because I had had a very, very extensive emergency surgery, and I came back and my body was rattled with pain, and so the one before, it was more dramatic, because it's like I didn't want to have to be in my body, and it took, several months for it to be very comfortable to be back in my body. The second time around, it wasn't like that, because whatever had happened was temporary. It was probably like an arrhythmia, and then the heart rate at some point corrected itself. So I wasn't uncomfortable physically, but I really missed that place. And I knew I'd made the right decision. I knew I had to do that, and I knew I'd made the right decision, but I longed for that place. And I still do. I'll probably long for it until hopefully I get to return someday. you know? Good question. I think I was just really overcome with emotion that the Lord had shown up for me. That was the thing. I was just so overwhelmed, didn't feel worthy that he had come to see me. It was just to be with him for that period of time. It was, it wasn't even very long, but it was this, I'd always been, a big fan of Jesus, my whole life. And I'd always loved him, but to meet him face to face in such a tangible and real and it was just so fully alive way. I I just bathed in that for a while. What else are you gonna do? You're gonna bathe in that for as long as you can. I wanted to stay there, and I didn't wanna leave that feeling of it, and I didn't wanna do anything to, mess that up, it was like, it's like, I don't wanna leave that feeling, I didn't wanna leave that presence that I felt, because I still felt his closeness. I was so careful about doing things that might, make me feel I don't want him to feel far from me, I want you're very aware of that after the experience. You want him to be nearby, so you're doing things that you're very alert to those things. Mm. Was to my husband at the time. It was Andy, my husband at the time, and he was very, very moved by the whole thing as well. Yes, he very much believed it, and he was very, very moved by it. I think he probably had some serious tears. He's a very strong believer. Let's see, yeah, I had 3 kids at that point, that they were all very little. And, I was married, and, I, we had lived in Ohio, and we had migrated over to Colorado, about 10 years prior, and so we were living in Southwest Colorado in the mountains, and my, family of origin was, we had all grown up in Ohio, but, we had all kind of, scattered about a little bit, I guess, and, um I had a beautiful experience when I was about 9 years old where I'd had a vision of Christ and, and had been kind of foretold that I was going to have some kind of purpose, and that I think has to do with the writing and the out-of-body travel, um, and so it had started, um, in, gosh, right around 1987, I believe, I started having these out of body experiences, and they became very, very regular. And so I was having the mystical experiences pretty early on. I was about 22 when they started up again. My kids were a little bit further apart because they had some issues with, some things like the ectopic pregnancy and different things that caused a bit of spacing between the kids. And we had to kind of move a little bit because the job that my ex had, involved, these elections. So we had to kind of move every 4 years or so. And so we kind of bopped around a little bit here and there a bit. Uh, but for the most part, I was always kind of a book nerd. And, early on in my experiences, I was led and directed to start gathering the ancient sacred texts, the writings of the prophets, saints, mystics, sages, and ascetics from all the world religions. And this started, this intensive seeking and study that became a part of, the writing that I do, and kind of weaves its way through all my books. And so I have this library now, about 5,000 ancient sacred texts, which I utilize and have, it's kind of like part of it's a mission. It's part of the calling that, you know, that I was led to do. And so it's part of the work that I do with the Out of Body Travel Foundation. And, and so uh, the ancient sacred texts are, the writings of the prophets, saints, mystics, sages, and ascetics are, these keys. I consider them like the golden keys, the great writings of God's best friends from throughout time and history when they were finishing up maybe their last lifetime on earth and leaving behind the directions, the things that they learned, the holy words, the holy realizations that they had to go on to the next level of evolution. And these amazing texts are just kind of like all around us. They're available, but most of us don't even really think about them. But they are containing literally this puzzle. And when you put the whole puzzle together, you have um, this master understanding, this master work of God, of all the different facets of the diamond, I guess is one of the ways I like to put it, because God is so many faceted. He's not one dimensional by any means. And so by studying all of these writings, it provides us with a window into those who have spoken with God throughout the ages, who have had these experiences throughout the ages, and who were led by God, by God's holy angels, and by the Spirit throughout the ages, and all in different and unique ways, but they all have a lot of great similarities as well. And when you put it all together, it really helps us to find our way to the purpose of our own life here on a lot of respects. A lot of what you'll find in a lot of my writings is you know instead of you all having to go out and buying all 5,000 books, I kind of bring a lot of that information together and make it simplified, and make it a little bit easier to access, because I've kind of spent my whole life doing all that, you know Well, it was always, God has always been number one for me. Um, and so that was always the thing. And of course, my family and my kids was always up there at the top. And I think that um, what happens when you have the near death experience is it kind of focuses you in even more. In my case, it I was focused in particular on the selflessness and on the fact, the earth serves a particular function. Don't try to change it. Just kind of do what you're going to do and realize that it's going to continue to be that, um, and serve that purpose. And, I had other experiences about that later on as well. My kids, and I was always obsessed with God. I was just always kind of a nerd that way, you know? Well, I'd already gone through a lot of spiritual changes due to my out of body travel and my previous near death experience and all my studying and stuff. So my beliefs had been directed to where I had been led back into the Catholic Church. And so I became a Catholic in the year 2000, and my experience happened in the year 2003. But my beliefs were always a little bit different than the Catholic Church. I need to be, fair and honest about that, because I always had these experiences about reincarnation and about some things that would not be probably within the realm of Catholic theology, even though I'm obsessed with Catholic theology and I love it. But there's other things too. Like, for instance, I've had these experiences of extraterrestrials and things, and extraterrestrials in the heavenly realm, in heaven itself. And so there's all kinds of little things, but reincarnation is probably the big one. And so that one has always been an important one to point out, that that's one that I've always believed in from the time I began my experiences, I should say. I did not believe in that until I started having these experiences and started having these out of body experiences where I was taken into past lifetimes. And that's when that whole thing started changing my belief system about that. Well, I think what it changed for me was that a life changes in an instant, and it's important to make the decisions for the right reasons in every instant, you know? And so even in that moment, I had to make the right decision in that instant for the right reasons. And, even knowing, uh, that it can go the other way, I could have been whisked off and my family's life could have been completely altered. Um, we have to make decisions constantly that are um, going to be judged um, by the virtues, and we have to be honest about our own vices, about our own selfishness, about all these things when we are making decisions, and we have to be willing to take the hits, so to speak, when we have to make a decision, knowing that it's not going to be, the outcome that we might have wanted to, we have to always remember our decisions will be judged by our intention. See, we usually can't see how things will play out because things play out in weird ways, even when we do have the best of intentions. But we do know that God judges us by our intentions and by the virtues and by what we are hoping to bring into the world. And so we want to try to bring as much love into the world and kindness into the world. And we want to be willing to put others ahead of ourselves when it is appropriate to do so, and we want to realize that this is actually the training ground for that selflessness. And if we don't achieve it here, we have to come back here or go somewhere else where we are going to continue working on learning those things. And so it's really a good practice to really contemplate and think about, well, there's a reason we are here, and this is a mortal realm, which means we die. We don't stay here permanently. We're here for a short time. That means there's something we need to achieve here spiritually. And so when you're doing your prayers, your meditations, your contemplations, put those thoughts out there because you want to accomplish those things. You want to accomplish the spiritual um, objectives that you sought out to achieve before you incarnated into this lifetime, and you don't want to waste time. You'll regret it when you cross over if you do. Well, not immediately. Um, most, the people that are supportive of you, who believe in God or believe in NDEs are going to be supportive of you. And then there's always going to be people who don't believe in that or who don't even believe in God. And of course, I don't usually talk to them about these things. I just keep it to myself with them and respect their boundary. I have a lot of family members who are atheists and who don't believe. And then, of course, as your children grow and become adults and they develop their own beliefs and stuff, those relationships change based on what their beliefs become as they grow into adults. A family of origin that was never really supportive of the spiritual or the mystical. And so I never really talked with them about this particular experience, I don't believe, but they were not supportive of the spiritual journey as a general rule. And and so sometimes, what you do learn is who is in your circle that is part of that spiritual circle, and those are the people you share with. And then there's others that are different types of acquaintances or friends, and they're not people you're going to be able to share these things with, and that's all right. We have different kinds of friends, different types of relationships, and you can still have meaningful relationships with people who don't share your spiritual experiences or beliefs. And I found that to be very true. Well, I mean, going back to the obvious, it's the fact that we are here to progress from selfishness to selflessness is absolutely the most simple message that came from my experience that I think I really wish a lot of people understood it because it's just so simple. And and I think when we're talking about trying to understand what is it that we need to do here, what do I need to do next? People are like, well, what do I need to understand? It's like, well, when the Lord gives us something really simple like that, I really appreciate it. You know what I mean? Because there are so many things that are more complex. And this was just so very simple. And it was so easily digestible, so easily understood by all of us and by every single one of us. And it applies to us all. But I think also the other part that I just can't put into words is just the love of God. God knew when he created us that he was creating us as imperfect beings. Okay, so I think what I would say is that the simplest thing was the message of selfishness to selflessness and how that applies to all of us, and that it's very easy for us to uh, grasp a hold of that for each one of us. It's a very simple spiritual instruction. The other thing is the love that God has for each of us. And one of the things that I would definitely want everyone to grasp from my experience was that God knew when He created us that we were going to be imperfect. And we do stress a lot about how we're imperfect. And so, therefore, God cannot love us. But the reality is, God created us that way. And so he knew we were going to be that way. And so if we understand that, then it makes it easier for us to grasp this unconditional love that he holds for us as his creation, as his creatures, as his children, and that this is not something he didn't anticipate or didn't know was coming. He knew exactly what was coming because he created us like this. And so it takes a lot of stress off. It takes a lot of the pressure off for us to be perfect, for us to be like, gosh, am I ever going to be good enough? And I struggle with this myself all the time. So I don't want to be a hypocrite and not say that. But I hear this from a lot of people who email me as well. We are all struggling with the idea that we'll never be good enough, just like I felt, wow, he came for me. But, isn't that what a lot of people who have near death experiences say? It's because we all feel that, don't we? And you know what? He's going to come for you too, you know, because he created you exactly as you are. And he knew that you were going to be imperfect as well. And he's going to love you with that same unconditional, unbounded love that he loved me. And I couldn't fathom. And that's what I really hope people will hear, and they will take it in and actually pray on it and meditate on it and allow themselves to, you know, bring that into their spirit, because this is something that you don't just take it in one sitting. It's something you really do, through practice, through spiritual practice. You start um understanding it better. You start bringing it into your soul in a more comprehensive way. We can. And ironically, um, in the last, I don't know, however long it's been, 5, 10, 15 years since our society has kind of gone down this slippery, you call it, the social media thing that has drawn so many people into that kind of pit, I think is what I'm going to call it. And the sad part of it is that there are excellent uses for all of these technologies, but there's also the negative one, which is playing on the vanity of souls to destroy them, you know? Um, and so you can utilize these tools and these technologies to do really beautiful and worthwhile things, but you can also destroy people by making them feel like they have to have this constant reassurance, this constant acceptance from even people they don't even know. And, back when I was younger, back before the internet, when we could actually be alone, either with ourselves or with one or two people and really enjoy them, or enjoy our time alone, either with God or just doing whatever it was we did. When I was younger, I would be walking through the woods. I would be playing in the grass in the backyard. I would play games. I would lie down in the grass and watch the clouds go by. It was like to think, that the world could change to where young people or people in general would be thinking only about this device and getting likes or approval from people they don't know. And all the things that we used to do, you know, going to the creek and watching the frogs and watching the tadpoles turn into frogs over weeks at a time. We used to do things, and now people, and this is why I think people are more likely to get so depressed and become suicidal, because there is this need for this validation, and it's a false validation. People are not having the real experiences with themselves and with God and with others that we had before, even before the internet um, became a thing. And so I think that um, this kind of reflection can help people to, I don't know, disconnect from some of these negative types of things that are pulling people into depressions that are technology based, maybe. And I think there's a lot of really cool things with the technology too. I obviously really utilize it and I enjoy it as well. But I think there's also this negative side. And um, I think that this causes a lot of disconnection from the spirit, from the soul, from God, from others, from our other real relationships. People do not connect with each other the way that they used to, one on one, or even just groups of friends, because these devices are always somehow interfering, you know. Well, ironically, the message that everything that I have experienced in out of body travel and in my near death experience is really the universal, it goes back to the universal experience of the prophets, saints, mystics, sages, and ascetics. You know, they all were fairly similar they all engaged in prayer, meditation, periods of deep silence, and being willing to be alone, being alone. And it's this simple formula. That's what has always been the mystical formula from, thousands of years ago to present day. And so it hasn't changed. It's nothing new. It's just the old is still what works today. And if we can remind each other that this is how it works. It's always worked this way, and all the ancient masters did it this way, and this is how it's done by today's modern masters, so this is what has to happen. We have to be willing to engage with the silence, engage with prayer and meditation, and we have to be willing to experience some time alone where we are able to pretty much open our hearts and our minds and our spirits to God. I think that people will be blown away by the beauty, by the expansiveness, by the love, and by the freedom that awaits us. But it is so important to realize that those things come to those who wait, because we have a reason for being here. And we have work to do while we're alive on this earth. So there are no shortcuts. We must complete the purpose for our incarnation here on earth. And then when our time is through, then there is a wonderful new chapter for our soul.
Recording